Hey everyone, welcome to this mini series about creating a WhatsApp-like group chat inside of our Flutter application. We will be adding this feature on top of our already created chat app from the previous series about creating a chat app in Flutter the right way. So if it is your first time seeing this video, I would suggest that you go back and watch the previous videos about creating a chat app in Flutter so that you can know how to create that app and then further to add this group chat feature on top of that app. So I want to give a quick demo here of what this will look like. As you can see, we have 3 iPhone screens displayed here and we have some active persons here. So what we're going to do is to show how this group chat feature works. So now I am just going to go to Mary's iPhone and I will click the group button to create a group chat. And here we'll be asked for a name and the persons who we want to be a part of that group. So I'm just going to give it a name, call it Teams, and I'm going to use the 3 users currently displayed, which is Jen and Brian. So that group will consist of Jen, Brian, and me, which is Mary. So we go ahead and click the create group, and that should create the group. And as you can see, both groups, the group is displayed on both Jen's iPhone and Brian's iPhone. And we have the message here that says group created. And from that, we can go ahead and send a message to both persons. So if we say hey, as you can see, hey is displayed to Jen and to Brian. And so if we go and open this message here on Brian's screen, we should see that message from Mary, and the name is displayed here and is color coded. And similarly, if we open that message on Jen's screen, we will have that color code there. So if I should go to Jen's screen now and say, hey guys, and send that message, then we'll see that message displayed here from inside of Mary's iPhone and also Brian's iPhone. As you can see, the names are also displayed here, which shows the members of this group. And also, when we are typing, you can see the typing indicator displayed at the top. So if I go ahead and say, hey, you can see Mary's typing on both screens. I go ahead and send that. Mary says, hey again. I go back to Brian, say hi. You see Brian is typing. And Brian sends that message. Now, if we exit the chat on all screens, we should see that the last message is from Brian, which says hi. And there it says you on Brian's screen says hi. Also, our single chat feature still works. So if I should go to Mary and send a message to Jen, say, hey Jen, you should see that message will show up on Jen's iPhone here. And if Jen opened that message, Jen can have a private conversation with Mary and Jen, which is different from the group conversation. So now you can see there is the group and there's that message, which I can go ahead and send messages to the group. Hello. And as you can see, Mary's typing here. Go ahead and send that. It says Mary says hello. And it's updated here also to say Mary says hello. So that's what we'll be doing. We'll be looking at adding this feature, this group chat feature, And how we'll approach this is by refactoring the existing app from the inside out. So we'll be starting from the services layer and going back out to the UI layer to refactor all those things so that we can include this group chat feature. So join me over there in Visual Studio Code so that we might implement this feature. So the first thing we want to do now is to modify our chat module to support the group feature. So we'll go ahead inside of our chat module and we go to our source into models rather, and I want to go ahead and add a model for the group. So I'm going to call it message group. Going to go ahead and add this class, message group class, and for this class there are certain properties that I want to store. So I want to store the group name, I want to store who created the group, the members of that group, and this private ID method, which will be returned when the record is created in the database. And so I've gone ahead and created a constructor also with those required fields. So now we want to create our toJSON method and our fromJSON method, which will map those fields to the appropriate database field and to map those fields also from the database to the correct attributes of this model. And so we have our fields appropriately mapped here to our database fields, which is created by the name of the group and the members in the group, which would be a list of user IDs of type string. Then we have our factory method here, which maps the database JSON object back to a message group object. So we have the created by, and we are fetching the appropriate JSON field from the JSON object, and also setting the group ID to the ID that is generated from the database, in our case the Rethink DB, when the group is created. So that's the first change we want to add by creating this group model. And the next thing we want to do is go ahead and create that group service, which will be responsible for creating our groups and also subscribing to receive created groups in real time. So we'll create a folder called group, and inside that folder I am going to create a group service. And this group service is basically the same thing as the previous services that we have created in this app about creating a chat app in Flutter the right way. So we have our message service here, our message service contract, and we have the implementation, which we will simply copy and modify for our group service. So inside of our group service, I'm going to create both the contract and the implementation in the same file. So I group service. And this will represent the contract, those methods to implement this group service. And so we'll have a method to create a message group, and this will create a message group in the DB. And then we'll have this group methods, which is a stream of events happening, or a stream of groups being created, where we'll subscribe to that stream to determine if a group created, we are a part of that group, so that we might also create that group on the local database in the device, so we can begin to send message in that group. So I'll create now the message group service that will implement this iGroup service contract. So we go ahead, create that, and also bring in those methods. And for its dependencies, we will create a few fields. So we'll have our connection to our RethinkDB. We have our RethinkDB instance, so that we can use that to perform database operations. We'll also have our stream controller, which will be a broadcast stream that we'll use to push those streams of data received from RethinkDB to the necessary block that our state management technology that we'll be using here. So we'll have a subscription feed, which is a change feed, and this will be what we'll receive from our RethinkDB. As if we have watched the previous videos, we'll be familiar with that by now. So for our message group, to create a message group, we will implement that method. So in this method, what we have done is to use our RethinkDB instance to access the message group table and insert the information that is passed in this group. So, and that will be written to the database, and we'll return the changes here so that we might access the created ID. And so we'll create a message group object using that from JSON method, and we'll pass in the new value that is returned due to this flag return changes. And so we'll create that message group and return that, which is a quite simple method. I will move my dispose method below my stream method. So let's go ahead and create this stream of groups. So the first thing is to create this method, start receiving groups, which will accept the user as the parameter, and then we'll return the stream from our controller. So let's go ahead and dispose our change feed here, and also our controller. Let's close that when the dispose method is called. So for our start stream method, start receiving group, let's copy that. For this method now, we'll need to subscribe to the RethinkDB stream and receive only groups for this particular user. So if there is a group created, but it's not for this user is not a part of the group, then we shouldn't be receiving that group in our subscription stream. So let's go ahead and create that. So this method is quite involved, and I will quickly explain what is happening here. So what we're doing is that we're saying we are accessing our RethinkDB instance, and we are going to the message group table, and then we are going to filter out all the things or the groups that does not belong to us. So that means inside of our filter, I'm going to fetch a group, and from that group I'm going to get the members, and then I'm going to check if that list of members, which is a list of array of user IDs that are stored inside this field, in this members field in the database. So I'm checking if that list of user IDs contains my user ID. So that's the first check. And that group was not created by me. So if that group was created by me, then I'm not going to subscribe to that, because I would have already saved that group in my local DB when I created it from the UI. So then I want another AND statement, and the group has fields received by. This right here is like a conditional statement in Rethink DB. So we have the condition here, which is true or false, and then if it is true or false, or if it has not the field received by, or if there is a received by field and that field does not contain my user ID. And the reason why we are doing this is so that as each person open their application and receive that group message or that created group, we want to log that user ID to this field to show that this person has already received this group message or this created group, so that we can use this to later check if all persons have received that subscription or that feed for that group. And if all persons have received it, then we can remove it from the database so that it's not holding up space in our Rethink DB. So we have our group here, and the group does not have this field, or if it has the field should not contain our user ID. So if we have not received it yet, then we should receive it. And so we have our changes here, which means we should subscribe to the changes and the initial mean true, so that if the message comes in while the app is not active, when you finally go ahead and activate the app or open the app, you would receive those changes or the groups that were created with you involved or included in it. And then we'll go ahead and run with the connection. As stream, we'll cast that to feed, and we'll listen again. If you have watched the previous videos, this would be something that is familiar to you now. So I'm getting each feed, and I'm saying if the new value is null, so if there's not a new end change, then I'll simply return. Else, if there are changes, I'll get the feed data and I'll create a group from the feed data. So in this case, I'll call this method pass in the feed data, and the feed data, which is a JSON object, and I'll simply create a message group from that data, and then I will add it to my controller sync. So I add the group now to this stream controller, which is a broadcast stream, so that this group will be pushed on that stream to be accessed from the UI. And we have our catch error here just in case there are some errors. So that is it for our receiving groups method, which returns a stream of groups that involves or include us. So, and the next thing I want to do is that whenever I add a group to the sync, to the stream, I want to call a method. I'm going to say and this method, update when received group created, is going to update the database with this user. It's going to update the received by list or array to say this particular user have received this group. So let's go ahead and create this method. Let's copy and paste. Have my message group here. then the user. So here inside this method, what we're doing is that we are updating the message group table to say that this user has received this message. So this looks somewhat complicated, but it's very simple. So what we have here is we're accessing again a Rethink instance, and we're accessing the message group table, and we're going to get the particular document or record for this group, which is this group ID, and then we're going to run this update method on it. And this update method accesses that document and uses this method branch, which branch behaves like an if statement. So what is happening here is that we're saying that if this group has field received by, if it has the received by field, then this would represent the then of that if statement. Then group that received by field should get the value that is there currently, which would be an array, and append this user ID to that list of array. Else or otherwise here, if it doesn't exist, if it's the first time, then create the field and pass this user ID as the first item in that array. So that is how we update the message group with the persons who have received that group so far. Now what we want to go ahead also is to remove that group when it's delivered to all the persons that are included in the group. So we'll have this method remove group when delivered. Let me go ahead, copy that. This will accept the map or the record that is returned from the update call. Due to this return changes always property. So for this method, it is pretty straightforward. What we are doing here is to get the list of members in this group and get the list of users who have already received this created group event. We are also getting the ID for this group, and then we are simply checking if the length of the members is greater than already received, meaning that those who receive that everybody has not yet received the message or the group, then return. We do not want to delete it. Otherwise, if everybody in that group has received that event to create the group, then we can simply go ahead and delete that record from our database to free up space. And so that is simple and straightforward. And that is our group service. We have created the methods to create a group and to also subscribe to receive groups that include us or include a particular user. So these are the two main files that are necessary. We have the message group and we have the message group service. So now I want to go ahead and refactor a few files so that things will work as we would like. So the first thing I want to refactor is my message class, because now I'm going to include a group ID in my message class. So I'm just going to add that group ID here as a property. add it as part of the constructor. Required, and also add it to my JSON and from JSON methods. Group ID is group ID. And then here my from JSON method, go ahead and fetch that from the JSON object. It's JSON group underscore ID. So that's the modification there to my message class. I also want to modify my user class to quickly override the operator so that I can compare two users using the equal operator. So that's a simple refactor there. Next, I want to go inside my services and I'm going to refactor my message service. Let's open the implementation and also the contract. So here inside the iMessage service contract, instead of sending a single message, I want the ability to send a group of messages or a list of messages. And so this will allow us to broadcast a single message to multiple persons. Instead of sending one message at a time, we can simply insert a bulk of messages into the database to every single person that is included in a particular group. So now inside of our message service, we need to go ahead and refactor our send message method to accept the list of messages as its parameter, and also to map those list of messages to the appropriate JSON list or data list that will be inserted into our messages table. So here we get that list of messages and we say map each message to data and return that as a list of JSON objects, and that then will be inserted into our database as the list of messages. So, and as you can see, that has caused a bunch of our tests to fail. So we'll go ahead and we can refactor those quickly. So require group ID instead of a single message here, even though it's a single message, I can simply pass it as a list and everything should work as normal. And simply add it as a list. Now I'll go ahead and refactor these quickly. So there we have refactored our tests, have that working, and our message service. Next, we want to go ahead and refactor our user service. So I'll open the contract and also the implementation. First, inside this contract, instead of returning a single user, instead of fetching a single user, I want to fetch a list of users. And by passing in a list of user IDs, so IDs, and then inside of our service, I'm going to quickly refactor this to fetch a list of users from the list of IDs that we have passed in. So here what we have done is we have gone to the users table and we're gonna say get all, and this r.args here passing the ID, so it's gonna get all users in this list of ID. If you are used to SQL, it's basically where in is like an in clause, and then we want to filter by active true, so we will only want to get those active users, and then we simply fetch the list of user data from the cursor, which is a stream, and simply map those JSON objects to actual user objects so that we can return a list of users. So that's a simple refactor there, and we'll next move to, as you can see, refactoring or typing events here, which is erroring out at the moment. Let's go ahead and open our typing events, implementation, and also the contract. And for our contract, what I want to do again here, like the message, is instead of returning a single event, I want to return a list of events. I also want to open our typing event model here inside of our models folder. And what I'm going to do is to add to this an extra field. So I'm just going to add an extra chat ID, so we can identify to which chat this event belongs. So again, I'm gonna just require that quickly, chat ID, and go ahead and add those to the toJSON and from JSON method. So now we have modified that to include the chat ID. Go ahead and close that. Now we need to modify our actual implementation to handle sending this list of typing events instead of a single event. So here I have refactored this method, which is a simple refactor. So now we have our list of events coming in. So what I have done so far is to say fetch the receivers of this event by using the user service to fetch, and I simply fetch all the user IDs in this case from the event, which is the typing event to method will have the user ID. So I get all the user IDs from the list of events, pass that to the user service fetch, which will return a list of active users. So I'm saying that now if it is empty, that meaning none of those users are active, then there's no need to send them any event. So I simply return false. Otherwise, I am removing the current user or myself in a sense from the events. So basically, so that I do not send events to myself. So but instead of using remove where, I use return where. So I'm retain all those users where the event does not have my user ID. So I'm retaining everything else except the user that sent the event. Then I went ahead and mapped those events to the appropriate JSON data and simply write that list of events to the database and return inserted greater than or equal 1. So if it inserted 10 records, then inserted count would be 10, and so on. The next thing I want to do is to go ahead and inside my remove event method, instead of removing based on event ID, what I'm going to do is to say filter here, and I'm gonna filter by chat ID instead. So chat ID is equal to event dot chat ID. So once that event is submitted and received, I can go ahead and remove that particular typing event. And as you can see, we have our tests failing here, requiring some refactoring, which is simply to make these into lists of events. So events, and this should be an array, and to add also the chat ID here. So I'm going to quickly refactor these so that they are passing. So there I have refactored all my tests so that they are now passing and without error. We have refactored our typing notification service here so that everything is working as it should. Now I'm just going to go ahead inside my chat module here and export that newly created group service. So first I want to export the message group, then I want to export the group service. So I can have access to those inside of my app. So these are all the necessary changes that we need to our chat module here in order to facilitate group chats and keep our single chats working. So I'm just going to move from our chat module now into our states management. So I'm going to refactor these, and also I need and add a new block for our group message, or to receive those message groups. So let's go ahead and create that folder. I'm going to call it message group, and inside this folder I'm going to create 3 files. I'm going to create the message group state file, I'm going to create the message group event file, and also the message group block file. So inside of our message group state file, I'm going to quickly create the state file. And these again are very similar to what already exists. Basically the same thing as what is here inside this message block service. So if you have watched the previous videos, it will be pretty straightforward. So I'm just going to quickly create that. So here we have, these are the states for message group state class, which is our abstract class with a few factory methods to create an initial state, a created state, and a received state. So we have our message group initial, we have our message group created, which accepts the group, and we have our message group received state. And the reason why these are not imported as yet is that we'll import it as a part of the block itself, since this message group state is a part of the message group block file, which is pretty straightforward. So we'll go ahead and also do the same thing for our events. And so for our events, we have the abstract class for events, and then we simply have some factory methods that will create the necessary event. But the main events we have here for our message group is basically our subscribe event, which will have the user that's subscribed. We'll have a message group created event, and we'll pass in the group that was created, and we'll have a message group received event, which is simple and straightforward if you are accustomed to using the Bloc library. So now that we have our state and our event, we can simply create our block to get everything working together. So here I've gone ahead and created our message block, and as you can see, we have imported all the necessary packages, and the group event and the state is a part of this, and so that the imports that were once failing here, for example message group and user, are no longer failing since they are a part of the message block file. So again, for message block, we understand this extends block since we are using the Bloc library, and we'll have it processes message group events and handle return message group state. And for each dependencies, we are using the group service here, and we will be using the subscription to cancel the subscription anytime we dispose, the block is disposed of. So inside of our super method, we go ahead and create an initial state, and then in our map to event state now, we have the different events that we're mapping to the appropriate states. So we have if the event is a subscribe event, the first thing we want to do is to cancel any existing subscription. And then we'll access the group service, access the groups method. Again, this method from the service is a stream of message groups. So we'll access that stream and we'll pass in the user, which is our current user, so that we can filter or access only those groups that belong to us or that include us. And we'll listen to that, and whenever we receive a group, we will add a message group event and pass in that group. And so now we check if the event is a message received event, we'll go ahead and yield the appropriate state, which is a message received state, and pass in the group. And similarly, when the group is created, we'll go ahead, access group service, tell it to create that group, and then yield the appropriate state. And then we'll have in our dispose or close method to dispose of the necessary subscription and service. So that's it basically for our message group block. Now that we have done our message group block, we can go ahead and refactor our message block here. So now, since our message service send method is processing a list of events instead of a single event, or a single message, rather a list of messages, we now need to pass in a list of messages instead of a single message. So I'll go to the message event, and where we have message sent here, instead of a single message, I'm gonna make that into a list of messages. Go ahead, call that messages, and then here we'll say list of message. We'll call that messages, and then we'll add that. So now inside of our block, we can simply access the messages from the event, and that should work. A similar thing is needed for our notification. There are typing notifications, so we'll go ahead and refactor that also. So in our typing notification event, again, when we send an event here, instead of a single event, we'll make that into a list of events. We'll call that events. And then now with our method here, again, this is a list of events. So now inside of our block, we can simply go ahead and say events, type in events, and that's the simple refactor for our typing notification block, since we are now receiving or sending a list of typing events instead of a single typing event. Next, I want to go ahead inside of our home and create a single qubit for our group. So I'm going to call that group Cubit. And all this does is a simple qubit that will allow us to add and remove users from our group list. And this will be used by the UI when we reach to that stage. So now I have refactored the state management, and we are moving further into the outer layers. But next, I want to move into our data layer and make some simple modifications to our SQL service. So for how we will now upload or insert data into the local SQLite database. But first, before we refactor our data sources, I'm going to refactor our chat method here, our chat model, and our local message model. As you can see here, require group ID. So we're going to refactor these because these are used directly by our data source. So for our chat, we want to add a few more fields here, and also to add a from map method or to add more fields to our from map method. So again, I'm just gonna quickly refactor this. So for the refactor of our chat model here, the first thing I did was to create an enum of chat type. So we can have an individual chat or a group chat, and then a parser for the enum type. So it will be parsed to the appropriate string value. And this again is very familiar using extension method, Dart extension method. This is something I've done a lot in creating this chat app. So if you have watched the previous video, this will be something that you have seen a lot, used a lot. And then for our chat, what I've done is to add the type, the chat type, and as you can see that we have GitLens assisting us to show the changes that I've made to this file. So I have the chat type here. I've added the chat type. I've added this list of members. So it's a list of members associated with this chat, a list of users, and I've added this map, which is members ID, which is simply a map of the users IDs and a list of generated colors. And you will see that when we reach to the UI part. So I will use this to store a map of the user ID and the color code that is generated for that user, so that the username, when displayed in the group, will have a particular color for that username. And as you can see, we've added those to the constructor, and we have in our toolmap method, we have added those also. And for our members, we have simply encoded the map members ID. We have encoded that JSON object so that we can store it in the database as a JSON string. And then we have our from map, which handles the parsing. And that's basically all the changes that we have done here to this chat model. Now inside of our local message, we need our chat ID here. And what we need to do is go ahead and add that to our message here. Group ID rather. So I'm just going to remove this group ID here, because this should not be a required parameter, rather it's an optional parameter, because the group ID can be null. Because if it is not a group chat, then there won't be a group ID. So let's remove that from our message class to not make it a required parameter. And now our local message should be fine. So now inside of our, now that we modify our models, we can go ahead, modify our data source. So go to our SQLite data source and refactor this. So the first thing I want to do is inside of our add message method here, whenever I insert a message, I want to go ahead and update the chat for that message to update the timestamp on the updated at field to say that that chat was updated at that time, because I'll be using this updated at field to order how the chats are listed in the UI. So that's the first refactor, simply to add another call to our transaction here to update chats. So after I've inserted the message, go on ahead and update the chats to set the timestamp, the updated timestamp to be the timestamp on that particular message. The next change I want to make here is to refactor this find all chat method, and this is the biggest change that will be added to this, to our data source. So here are the changes we've made. As you can see, I've removed the subquery. I've removed that select group by statement, and what I've done is to simply replace it with some synchronous calls to the DB. So the first thing I've done is to get the list of chats, and I'm ordering those by the updated at in descending order. And I'm saying if the list of chats empty, then I simply return an empty list. Else, I'm going to take those list of chats and I'm going to run it inside of a wait so that everything will be processed before we return. And I'm going to map those. So each row from the list of chat, what I want to do is to say, to use SQFlite first in value and run a raw query now to select the count from messages where chat ID is equal to the chat ID for the particular row, and the receipt is delivered. So those are the unread messages. And then I'm going to find the most recent message for this chat, which again is to query messages where chat ID equal to the chat ID for the current row, and we are ordering that in descending order, and we get in the one from the top, which is the most recent message. Then we go ahead and create a chat from map, which is the row is a JSON object. We'll set the unread, and we'll say if the most recent message is not empty, then we'll create a local message from the most recent message, and we'll set that the chat most recent message to that. And this is the simple refactor we have done to the find all chats class method. Next, I want to go inside my find chat method here, and what I want to do is to say the only time I'm going to set the most recent message, if most recent message if that is not empty. Because what will happen if I try to set it when it's empty, this first will throw an error, and since I am not using null safety in this application, we might run into some problems there. So I'll check first if this is not empty, then I'll go ahead and set the local message to the most recent message. And those are pretty much the changes that we'll be adding to this class so that our group chat feature and the rest of the application might work as expected. So now that I've refactored that, I'm going to go into my database factory here, my DB factory, and what I want to do is inside of my chats table here, I need to update this to add the other fields that's a part of our chat model right now. So as you can see from my GitLens changes here, the fields that we have added to the database table are the columns. So we have added a name column, we have added a type column, members column, which will contain the members ID. So like a JSON list of member IDs on the particular color code that maps to that member. We have a created at, which is a timestamp and which uses the current timestamp. We have an updated at, which is the same thing, which we also will update whenever we receive new message, since we use it as the ordering field for our list of chats. And that is the simple change will be added to our DB factory here, so that we might create our table with a new set of fields. And so that's it for our data layer here, if you will. So next we will be moving on to our UI layer in the next video, which will include our view models also that we'll have to refactor. So we'll refactor our view models and our UI to get everything up and running. And as you can see, we have tests needing refactoring also, which we will do in the next video. But That's it for this video, and we are trying to finish this series as quick as possible in 2 videos if possible, so that you guys can see how this is done as quickly as possible. So thank you guys for tuning in, and see you in the next video. And the code for the previous series, which is creating the chat app, is on GitHub, but the code for the message group feature will not be shared on GitHub. So you'll have to go through to see what is happening here. But thank you again for tuning in, and see you guys in the next